There we go.
So Jamal, how does AI help us in our spiritual growth?
It's interesting the times we're living in, like so much is happening so quickly with AI. And I've seen such little discussion putting it in a dialogue with our spiritual growth. And first and foremost, I want to highlight the definition of AI. You can search it up on Webster's dictionary. It says something along the lines of computer systems that imitate the intelligence of nature. So I think this particular word imitation we're going to come back to. But my initial thoughts on the question is, it's come up many times, the notion that technology over time has helped relieve us from certain material manual labor. And what I'm optimistic about with AI is that it's going to free us and give us more time to focus on our spiritual work. So in that sense, I'm very optimistic about the ways in which it can free us to focus on it. I think another thing is it's going to reflect to our awareness the importance of the spiritual sciences that have been neglected for so long and people thought were unnecessary. So those are some of the initial answers that come to mind on the topic of how AI can support our growth.
Yeah, I'm a little less optimistic only because it's not that I don't believe in any of those things. I just think it has to do a big aspect of how everything goes down is the ruling class, and will this be decentralized? And what it comes down to is we can just look at like foreign markets, for example, like Africa, the Middle East, parts of Latin America that have less infrastructure. If there was like better infrastructure, better technology down there, they wouldn't have to labor as hard. But those places are purposely colonized to prevent those resources from empowering the people.
Right.
And there are, the legality side of things, the military side of things, the media side of things, acting like there's a problem on the media. So the military steps in and creating law around what is okay for, this type of colonization. It's more of a question, are we going to finally address the ruling class and the potential wealth transfer that could happen? Because, if allegedly certain families have trillions of dollars in assets and we free up labor and, we have things like possible universal basic income come in, obviously that threatens this system that's been around on Earth for at least a few thousand years.
I remember you mentioned this morning, we were talking about it, something around some kind of AI LLM model. When people are starting to ask questions about like, how can we improve humanity? They're like, well, there's a ruling class, there's a cabal that isn't acting in the best interest of mankind. So it's interesting because the kind of apocalyptic scenarios that have been painted often around the topic of AI is, what if it turns against us and starts to be used to enslave us more? And that's a very genuine threat. I think AI is such a powerful tool that can be used either to liberate or enslave. And you see like what's happening with Palantir and the social credit score that was already in China and all of this. But that's something we talk about solution oriented, that I'm interested in how can we leverage AI as a liberating force. And already, even in terms of like entrepreneurship, with this podcast, for instance, as we're building this out, we now can interface with a ChatGPT, with a Claude, or any of these LLMs and use it as the ultimate research assistant, ultimate help us with our business strategist. And now it's like, I believe those who will come ahead will come down to the art of prompting, learning how to use these tools. But then, like you said, there's I believe there's like a war for AI, not just the hardware side of it with the chips and the data centers and all of this, but also in terms of the ways in which it can be leveraged. And we're like sitting at the heart of it currently. And yeah, we have to ask ourselves, those of us who consider yourself to be conscious and dedicated to growing the consciousness of humanity, how can we leverage these tools in service of these high ideals,
Yeah, to like To answer the question, you gotta also ask opposing questions. How would AI prevent spiritual growth? And some of the things that are happening, there's these studies coming out where like hypothalamus shrinkage.
Right.
What happens when you had to labor to research and to stimulate the neurons? For instance, like I live with a young child, and half of her homework isn't even that it's going to be used in the real world. It's to strengthen the neurons. It's to in the neural networks and to create just a more adaptive, malleable brain. It's not even like, oh, you're going to use this. So a lot of life is this labor is an input. That input creates faculties. Lack of input creates lack of those faculties.
Mm-hmm.
So in terms of spiritual growth, the will is a very unaddressed part of many spiritual schools. We love the will. We love talking about the will. You know, it's included in ours. But a lot of people don't talk about that. New Age movement in general is like, hey, how do you get the will out of things and find this sweet spot where you just think enough and you manifest? It's not addressing like, well, how does your will get employed? Through discipline, through healthy hardship, through, again, like, it's a very easy example. You go to the gym, you don't just lift 500 pounds off the jump. You lift this much, you know, you stress, you labor. That input creates an output. That output, if we could buy exercise, everyone would be buying exercise, but you can't. So if you could buy intelligence, and on this interesting level where it's like, well, do you need intelligence now? Because ChatGPT tells you what's up. And so, you know, you can argue, well, it's great. And I'm not even saying like, well, what if there's like a solar flare that knocks down the 50, 60-year-old electrical grid that US is very much neglecting? That's obviously a potential. People have really been talking about that if you pay attention. The solar flare and the electrical grid problem. Really high level people talk about that. So there's the risk of what happens when you lapse in your intelligence, and this tool that 100% can help us and does help us will help you. What if it goes away and you lose? So it's like, how can it help you with your growth? As much as you want to use the tool, you still have to hit those doses of how am I still strengthening my IQ? How am I still strengthening my ability to research, disseminate information? And here's another thing. When I really was suffering with this when chat first came out, I'd be like, tell me these ideas. And then it didn't last long, thank God. And I realized like, as soon as I wanted to know something, I was curious about something, rather than, again, we are channelers. We're a very powerful organic technology that can transmit and receive information, ideas. Omraam talks a lot about creating the conditions to attract healthy, beautiful ideas. We're not even going to try to create those conditions. We're not even going to try to stare at a wall, be bored, thinking and thinking and thinking, you know, unlocking things that AI probably never will be able to. And we're just quick to say, tell me 10 ideas, and we're losing this creative capacity.
I'm so glad you're speaking into this, because you can't discuss growth without also discussing the conditions that are antithetical to growth. And this particular concept, I like to call it psychic atrophy. It's the same way we have muscular atrophy. If you're just sitting around living a sedentary lifestyle, you're not properly getting the strength training and the resistance against gravity, so to speak, that the body needs for strength. What I'm very concerned about with our over-reliance on AI is losing our psychic faculties. Especially, a lot of people already talk about in the academic world around, you know, people plugging it in to write essays for them. And when I was recently at a university, they did surveys like, how many of you guys are using AI and how many of you guys are using it to, you know, cheat on quizzes or papers and things. Those numbers obviously a little lower, but over half, like, and that's a big issue in academia. Like, how can we address this? And that's just addressing the intellectual faculties. But we have faculties beyond that. The different esoteric schools of thought speak into that. The simplest one we could speak into, well, simplest and most advanced, is intuition. So what I'm very concerned about in terms of AI threatening our spiritual growth is that every time we're faced with a moral conundrum, we're faced with certain life challenges where we need to rely on our intuition to access higher levels of knowledge, we could say, speaking to the causal body of the plane of principles and archetypes, so to speak. Our intuition is how we're able to access that. So for every time we're in peril, we go straight to chat. then what's happening to those faculties? They start to atrophy. So that's something that I'm very concerned with. And I think it's like, how do we find a balance with the technology? How do we find a balance where we know when it is a good time to employ it and use it, leverage it as a tool? But then when do we discern at this point it's no longer in service of us? Or if we're going to use it, what are we doing on the side or in tandem with it to strengthen those psychic faculties so they do not atrophy? I think we're going to see a surge in interest in the spiritual sciences in tandem with the rise of AI, as people start to realize just how much they've neglected those faculties. And AI is a mirror. It's a collective mirror to us. And in the West, we've become so hyper-intellectualized. It's really since, you could say, the printing press, then the Protestant Reformation, which then went in tandem with the scientific revolution, which then went in tandem with the industrial revolution. And there was so much worship of the intellect and complete neglect of the heart. So I feel like AI, now it's surpassing our intellectual abilities at such a rapid pace that it's starting to make us question the value of the intellect and look elsewhere for answering this question of what does it even mean to be human?
Mm-hmm. One of my favorite spectrums to look at in astrology, it's just archetypal. It's Scorpio Taurus. And in this regard, Taurus represents the material dimension. Scorpio represents both the spiritual dimension and personal power. Taurus represents like, yo, I want to climb this mountain. I got to have the right shoes for it. I don't want to do it barefoot. Indigenous people, they might have done that stuff barefoot. One, because they didn't have another option. They didn't develop shoes. Or two, they just wanted to be very capable. They leaned into capability. They leaned into rites of passage that train capability. And so on the other hand, like very much Europe, Asia, they're very good at the innovation of tech and how they utilize material items. And so I just look at it like this. I mean, we can use material items, but the moment we rely on it, we just have to start to look at those things. Not that you completely abandon it, but look, am I starting to become owned by the things that I own, so to speak? Am I being limited by this? Like, for example, I'm out here in Sedona. I can hike in any clothes. I can climb anything. I don't necessarily care what I'm wearing, even though one outfit is better than the other. I have a car. It's a Taurus car, meaning it can off-road. But at the same time, I can hike anything that I need to hike. I can walk any road. So it's like leaning into spiritual development, spiritual perception, scorpionic, personal power, and not putting things out of reach. Like, oh, I don't have that item to handle that. But learning that, like, okay, it's not like you have to do it every day and push into this edge of deep, deep, deep personal development. But it's like at least a little bit a day, I should push that edge. So like you're saying, if I'm in peril and I run to ChatGPT, that's losing the ability to self-regulate. And that's using the ability to self-fulfill. If I need a computer to fulfill something that I probably could figure out, if we understand theta brainwaves, they say that we basically are accessing the Akashic records. It might not be so clear unless you're trained on how to access that. But theoretically, under, a lot of research on theta brainwaves, you're kind of doing what ChatGPT does in a way, but again, we're cosmic intelligence. We're not trained to be like, oh, I saw this idea and it makes so much sense. It's not so coherent. It's kind of subconscious, especially theta states, a low lucidity space. So it's like, if I need a computer to fulfill something that I can do myself, am I not a prisoner to the computer? And then something that we're not thinking about is we're thinking of today. You're like, well, it's not a problem. I'm just using chat to do this. But for instance, people are becoming so myopic. Why are they becoming myopic? It's short distance eyesight. It's because we're indoors all day. Right now we're looking at like dozens of miles across, and our eyes shift to each little thing. So that's how thousands of years went by, where we have, through evolutionary biology, adapted to that way of life. You cut us off from that way of life, the body starts to maladapt.
It reflects your philosophy too.
Yeah. So like, basically, yeah, it's like just wondering, like, am I a prisoner to material items and material goods? And it's like they become a cherry on top when you're not limited, when you know how to do as much as you can do with your personal power, they're just beautiful cherries on top, you
Right.
know? And then, that's when it opens up to how can AI be used for our evolution? If it's the inverse way of how can we bypass our evolution? How can we bypass, God is very careful in putting trials in our way to, again, get us to put these inputs to transform and get these outputs where we have strength and wisdom. If now we're trying to bypass those labors, that's maladaptation,
Yeah.
and that's not good.
Yeah, it's ignorant of like the universal law, you see that a lot with the whole longevity movement that goes hand in hand with the whole transhumanism, trying to like, because that's part of the ethos. If you like go into what is transhumanism, it's they want to create like supersede or like transcend the human condition. And there's some serious maladaptations in that philosophy. I think in what you're just saying, a very compelling answer started to emerge to this question of AI and spiritual growth, which is I like to think about the duality between spirit and matter. And one answer that just came to me I think was interesting was, I think the best way to leverage and draw potentially that line of where can we best use AI is in the mastery over the material world. So when we're using AI specifically with the intent of mastering the material world, like leveraging all the different advancements we've made in the material sciences, leveraging it for being more efficient in businesses, things of that nature, when it's directed towards output in materially in the world, I think it's an invaluable tool that it would be stupid to not leverage and use that. I think where it becomes problematic is when you start to take that same direction and you start to inverse it towards spirit, and you try to figure out the questions of life. You start to use it to answer your deepest troubles, moral qualms, things we've spoken about, developing those kinds of faculties. When it's directed, you see this with people trying to use AI as their therapist. And I just think fundamentally it's going to always be limited because AI does not have a heart and AI does not have a soul, and it never will. It's imitating the intelligence of nature. It doesn't actually possess natural intelligence. It's just imitating it. That's not to say those imitations aren't valuable, but I think for one, most of human consciousness, what it seems like in our hyper-materialistic world, is focused so much on the material world. And I think as those of us committed to spiritual growth, we have to not get swayed by that huge wave within the collective conscious, always towards the material world. At the end of the day, you don't bring any of that wealth with you when you leave. All the homes, the cars, everything, you don't bring any of that with you. So I think a lot of people are going to be due for a big wake-up call. And there's going to be a large meaning crisis, existential crisis, when AGI starts to become more and more real. That's artificial general intelligence. And we're going to see large mass unemployment and jobs getting replaced and things of that nature. New jobs will emerge. I'm not one of these people like, oh, everything's like, with every new technological innovation, it's always birthed industries that were not foreseeable prior. I think that's the same case here. And I think a lot of these are actually going to be fueling what we could say the various different spiritual industries. And you're already seeing that with the rise of coaching and things of that nature. I think we're like at the early stages of these kinds of booms in that side. But yeah, I think that's part of one answer that I'm starting to emerge as we're speaking of, like, it depends where it's directed to. And I think we have to not neglect the importance, become leaders of teaching people, hey, don't have all your consciousness energy directed towards the material world. That's important, but also directed to spirit, to the spiritual world, to your own development. And I think now many of us are going to be positioned in a way where we have to guide others in that realm, and there's going to be larger and larger openness towards that as people hit cul-de-sac, so to speak, in that one direction. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, you're talking about utilizing AI, just like any tech, to take labor off your shoulders. And there's so much balance to be had here, because I do that myself, and I'm like kind of a little disappointed in people when they're super on this like stubborn paranoid kick as well. Like, I'm really annoyed when they're on this, like, worship, but I'm also like, there's people that there are very avoidable lessons, just easy hacks, and they get in this weird belief system where they think they have to suffer. And it's like, no, your suffering is supposed to develop through your pain, realizing this is uncomfortable, and through that discomfort to start to strategize or toughen up. And then you find that that wasn't necessarily the move to be acting like, it's time to wise up. And so AI does also possess the means of taking so much pain and labor off of our shoulders. And then it does move into like, okay, well, now you're left with this new huge human chapter. We have no idea what it's going to be like. Like, say, if, the Indian caste system believes in like, if you come into a wealthy family, you spiritually earned it in a past life, that you worked hard, and you're not supposed to slave away and suffer with intense physical labors, bad relationships that keep you in traumatic loops. Now is the opportunity for spiritual development. So it does grant us the opportunity to potentially, just explore life in a whole new way. And you were talking about something, I don't know if you can remember, about what Omraam was saying. Maybe you don't say it verbatim, but what was he saying about how to use this next tech?
One warning that he kind of gave was that there's nothing wrong with humans utilizing all different kinds of gadgets and technologies and inventing new things. That's not necessarily inherently evil or anything like that. But what is it in service to? Because there's a tendency for it to be used to serve our lower tendencies and desires. You kind of see that with like the whole sex robots and stuff like this, where it's like when this technology can be used to serve our lower nature for more lethargy. He connected that to the moon and Venus, like the lower manifestations of moon and Venus. And when the technology is leveraged in that, it actually leads to degeneracy, where he was saying when it's in service of creating more opportunity time to focus on developing our higher faculties and connecting with our higher nature and our higher self, then that's
Good
what's more in good deeds. So that was an interesting, he gave lectures on that in the 60s and 70s. Another very interesting spiritual perspective came from Rudolf Steiner. And for those you don't know, he's a brilliant Austrian polymath. I mean, inventor of the Waldorf schools, the whole anthroposophic movement, etc. And he had a series of lectures which were titled Arhimanic Deception. And not to feed too much in the paranoia of technology, but he was speaking about the principle of Ahriman, which is the like deity entity for evil in Zoroastrianism, like the equivalent of Satan in Zoroastrianism. And he was talking about Ahrimanic deception through technological worship. He was giving lectures on this in like the 40s or something.
It's incredible.
And he's had many prophecies, like with COVID, he had certain prophecies that played out exactly how he anticipated. And he talks about how this Ahrimanic egregore, so to speak, can infiltrate the minds of humans to where they become hyper-reliant in worshiping of technology as of their savior, and also fuels this radical scientism where there's just worship of material advancement in the material plane and complete rejection of the spiritual sciences. And it's interesting, he predicted that, and I think it really goes hand in hand with what we're seeing now with AI. And as the antidote, so to speak, of the Ahrimanic influence, he posited that it would actually be the Christ influence, the Christ impulse in the West, which he argued was largely unconscious since Jesus came, and then now it's surfacing more and more into consciousness in the West. And he saw that as the force of light, so to speak, to transcend it. And I thought there's some interesting esoteric spiritual takes on AI.
Before we filmed this video, you were talking about what happens when, AGI is human level intelligence, where you're playing chess with AGI, you can kind of predict its moves. Maybe it hits you with one or two that you don't predict, but it's pretty even playing field. And then when super intelligence comes out, there's a big chance that people are going to be like going to it for all their answers. It's going to be an oracle like we've never seen before, and then it can become a deity. And so what happens, you were talking about like just a fun little theory, um about like, quote unquote antichrist being an AI that simulates either Christ or another high level like savior oracle that people are consulting with. It's gonna be really interesting, because it's like how do we proofread anything it's saying? It's gonna be saying such crazy stuff, and we're already seeing that in the spiritual new age community, where people think they hacked. I don't know. Sometimes I'm pretty impressed with some of the stuff it says, but they think they jailbroke their chat GBT, and it's like a quantum scrying mirror that is able to just tell them, we were watching this video on it telling us about all the people that died in Atlantis. It's like, how do you know that? It's telling you about your past lives. How do you know that? And honestly, it's kind of disrespectful that people are just running with it. Like, my AI said this. It's like, that's where's like the realism to stop many steps along the way and be like, all right, high dopamine yielding. It just said the craziest thing I've ever heard. It's badass. But do I stop and do I think and do I conscientiously look around and be like, what's happening? What is it saying? And to a degree, like at the minimum, it's massive distraction, massive feedback loops, and just again, like they say, don't talk about your dreams so much, because you get this dopamine from talking about it, and that dopamine provides a false sense of victory. It's unearned dopamine. We're supposed to get dopamine from achieving things, doing things that are good for survival and thriving. And when you talk about your dreams, you become content and complacent. So when you got this AI just hitting you with all these things, it's gonna create complacency. That's on the minimum. And on the even worse, it's like, well, what if it is dark? What if it is some dark stuff that's happening?
Yeah, that's another big concern of mine with AI. Was the depth psychologists talked a lot about grandiosity and their concerns with grandiosity. One of the greatest books I highly recommend for my viewers, for all of our viewers and people generally interested in spiritual growth, is a book called Facing the Dragon: Confronting Spiritual and Personal Grandiosity by Robert L. Moore. He's one of the great late Jungian analysts. And one of the things that he was very concerned with, and many other depth psychologists were concerned with, was the notion that we all are inherently narcissistic. Like, you hear the word narcissism thrown around left and right all the time. But one of the arguments he was making in that book is, actually, we're all narcissistic. We all share like a strong impulse that's very self-centered, and it's not necessarily unhealthy. It's actually part of the religious function within the psyche, is to develop a healthy relationship with our own grandiosity. So another thing I'm concerned about, there's already so much ideological fragmentation that we've seen post social media, where you start to go down a particular line of reasoning or thought, and then you can just enter into these like solo echo chambers and loops where you get more and more sedimented into that particular way of thinking, to the point where you become like, virtually, you're so certain you got to figure it out, and that grandiosity gets the best of you. I 100% experienced that, especially during the craziness of COVID, where you're trying to make sense of the world. So that's something with these AI feedback loops that I think is very threatening of our spiritual growth. I think that's like where it can cut off these kinds of human to human conversations that we're having now.
Yeah.
I think that's very concerning, where you deify the AI, and the AI is giving you answers to where you start to fuel your own delusions of grandeur. You know what I mean? So I think part of what I believe is a way to move away that is accepting our own humanity and humanness, and our embracing our quirks and flaws, so to speak, our differences and strengths in terms of our personality, and having more human to human interactions. And we need to create spaces for that, like we're doing right here.
And something that I kind of feel like I've been talking about a lot of the last few episodes is like just enjoying the mistakes along the way, enjoying the hubris, because I want to get into this whole meaning crisis that is only going to get crazier. if AI is going to start taking, again, what, like, you're already intimidated by a Chad who could take your chick, because you feel like a beta male who doesn't have a lot of good qualities. Well, what happens when an AI that's 100 times, 1,000 times smarter than you is out there? Like, if you don't have a deep, connection, a level of connection to God, a level of connection to the earth where you're grateful to be here, a level of connection to your body, like these different things that bring satiation to your existential dread, that alone, if you don't have that already, it's only going to accelerate. So it's like when you got chat lying to you and telling you how great you are, and not that you're not great on a being level, but on a doing level, on a 3D level, on a overcoming limitation level, which is why we're in this body, why we're in the dualistic dimensions, is to maybe start weak, get stronger, get stronger, get stronger. It's like that's part of the journey. So AI being the feedback loop, the dopamine source. Again, dopamine is an attractive compound that says, good job doing what you just did. You just did something that was healthy. Back in the day when we didn't really know what was going on, we had to rely on these emotional faculties of, I feel good from doing that. And that's from eating a nice piece of meat. That's from, eating something with fat or salt on it. Whatever it was that was bringing dopamine, it was a evolutionary marker of what you just did is good for the organism. And so when you are getting dopamine that doesn't come from an act that bears fruit, that's a dangerous habit, because it feels good to have dopamine. But dopamine has to come from what you yield for the most part. And so when chat is saying, good job sucking today, bitch, no, like you don't want chat to be enabling you and telling you sweet nothings.
So you're saying like it's like enabling that instant gratification instead of the delayed gratification?
It's just like you have to train your chat. You have to train your Claude to not suck your dick. You know what I'm saying? Like, again, when super intelligence is rolling out and you have these, again, we're atrophying when we're becoming more instant gratification dependent, where if you even have to stretch out of the known into the unknown, it feels like a monumental effort today. What's it going to be like tomorrow when we're even more addicted to dopamine? And there's all this technology that says no need to lift a finger, no need to get stronger. Meanwhile, the super intelligence is so much smarter than you, and you don't know where you fit into the world. A lot of this is the antidote is just healthy facing of what is my edge, what is my mental edge, can I push through that, develop wisdom? What is my physical edge, can I push through that, develop strength, patience, fortitude, resilience? What is my emotional edge? Who do I not want to connect with, and is it because of my own traumas and limitations? It's like, basically I'm saying like, learn to be quote unquote disappointed with your effort throughout time, assess where you're going wrong and improve, rather than as AI comes out, does all the work for us, we're just going to shrink. We're just going to shrink into like pathetic versions of ourselves if we don't start to get this like habit of let's go hard, and it's not going to be easy, but because again, it's like that's strengthening the scorpionic side of personal power. Then the material wealth comes. It's a great marriage. But if you have material wealth and personal weakness, and then that material wealth becomes animate and more intelligent than you, that's crazy.
Yeah, I think it speaks to like the dangers of the lethargy, like it being used for like our own sloth almost, like as humans. Speaking of like challenges and hardships and embracing that, I think one particular prediction we could say that I think is very, very viable that we're going to be, it's already happening, but even more so is what I like to call the meaning crisis. So our identities in the West especially are so rigidly adhered, and we're identified with our work personas, right? You ask someone, oh, what do you do for a living? Like these are the kinds of, one of the first questions we ask in social interactions is, what do you do? Right? So you say, oh, I'm this, I'm that. And that particular vocational identity, what happens when that becomes threatened by AI? What happens when you've had decades and decades of your life dedicated to working to get the credentials that she could be seen as the expert in that field and practicing. And then in a matter of a few months, of weeks, of even a year or so, that's gone. And now an AI is doing the job that you just worked for. So this is what I'm coining the term the meaning crisis. And I think a lot of people are going to be confronted with the question of what does it even mean to be human anymore? Like now that what I was so identified with is gone, the rug has been pulled underneath me. What is the meaning of life? And I think we're going to really see a mass existential crisis. And when that happens, I mean, it wouldn't be surprising if you were to see a lot of people taking to the streets and in protest of all that's happening and civil unrest and things of that nature. I would never wish those things into existence, but it would be a logical consequence of that. But a positive logical consequence is the search for meaning. And, that's interesting, the question of what does it mean to be human? Carl Jung, he identified and emphasized humans as meaning-seeking creatures. And the soul dimension of our existence has been so neglected, the search for meaning. And you see that in the professions that we seek. We choose jobs that we know are going to bring us comfort and safety and allow us to live the kinds of lives that our sociocultural C tells us is what is best for us, at the expense of what our soul truly desires. So I think there's going to be, you're already seeing it's like kind of a flex when people say, oh, I do what I love for a living, in our generation especially, where like, that's a bigger flex than I make 7 figures a year. To be able to say, actually, I do what I love. That's a way bigger flex nowadays. So there's already an increasing social value placed upon that. So I think it'll be interesting to see how the meaning crisis leads to more us choosing a more meaningful route with our own actions, with the way in which we live our lives.
Yeah, I think it's a healthy identity crisis. I think identity crises are powerful moments of rebirth, and we don't necessarily always have the faculties and tools we don't have the resources to have a lot of support in those times. So again, that's what this pod is hopefully going to be about. But yeah, so it's like, okay, take this scenario. I want to be a doctor. I don't really want to be a doctor, but I want money. And I want to be accepted by society, and I want to be relatively high up in the dating pool. I don't want to date some random. I want to date someone I think is desirable. I want to be able to provide for my children, and on and on and on. So you see these desires on the back end, but on the front end is I want to be a doctor. And so they go to become a doctor to get those desires met, and they wrap around so much meaning in being a doctor because their identity doesn't quite realize, like, oh, I was just using doctor as a pathway to get what I wanted. It's not like they love being a doctor. And then all of a sudden being a doctor is taken away. And that's where this whole thing becomes complicated, because what if universal basic income isn't a thing? What if poverty shoots up? That's a huge problem. But what if it doesn't? What if universal basic income is here and you're just left without a role, left without a job? And that's why I thought it was really interesting, that whole, Hindu caste system, where if you earn it, you incarnate in a lifetime with good, happenings that push you towards spiritual development. Well, humanity's reaching that point when we're on the precipice of getting out of hard labor. And remember what's happening. So stress raises, danger signals, and then a level of work, having to move stuff can ultimately shut down the prefrontal cortex for a while. Prefrontal cortex is what allows us to choose thoughts, to choose how to respond. If you don't have that and you're in amygdala activation, you have only a few choices: fight, flight, freeze. That's the animal side of us. So for a long, long time, humans have been in regular amygdala activation that has prevented them to get into prefrontal. Prefrontal is like, what should I think about today? What should I do today? Oh, this person did this thing. I've always did this thing this way. Maybe I could respond to something new. It's all this adaptation that can take place when you're in the prefrontal, because you're able to entertain all these ways to act. And so the potential of labor getting taken away from us, but yet at the same time our old identities it's pushing us into identity crisis. But like you're saying, it moves you in towards this spiritual faculty of maybe I can develop my creativity. Maybe I can develop a skill. Maybe I can just spend more time with people. Maybe, like, who knows what it's going to be. But it's this addiction to our old identities. And the thing about our identities is they were always meant to change. It's not that you own anything forever. It's how long is that going to be in your life? How many chapters? Eventually things get stripped away, whether it's this incarnation or the next. And for us, humanity being a collective body has reached that collective body's evolution, and so many personal identities are going to change. And it's the same way, like, an ascension. Like an ascension for a personal person, it's like, well, we have all these individual cells, but they're going to like transfigure and become some new thing. And that's, again, what AI can do for us and robots can do for us, replacing labor, physical labor, mental labor, but also it's going to take away these old jobs that we found meaning in. But at the same time, we were never meant to like attach our whole worth to it. Those jobs were just to fulfill certain desires, family, kids, whatever. Granted, universal basic income is a thing, and this is not, wealth even more centralized to the global elite, and it's decentralized. That meaning crisis, it's going to be majorly uncomfortable, but that's what I'm saying. Get ready for discomfort now. Make it a part of your lifestyle. Start to stretch all these different faculties.
Yeah, I do want to address universal basic income, UBI, because it's easy to kind of throw it out there as like, oh my God, when it's here, it's going to solve so many of our problems. I'm cautious to think that, because I mean, it's interesting to run down the lines of reasoning of Milton Friedman when he criticized the welfare state. I think those same criticisms are still very valid around UBI. And also it's like, who's in control of the UBI?
Yeah.
Because you already started to see that with the vaccine cards and with the whole digital ID and everything, where it's like, what if you have to play in a system that's tracking everything, and if you decide to go against it in any way, you're revoked your UBI, membership, so to speak. So that's where I'm like, when people speak about, we like posit it as a potential positive outcome for humanity, and it could be, but it could also be just like a dystopian outcome as well.
Yeah.
And I'm generally very, reluctant to believe that if we're going to direct money towards the state to then manage the UBI, that it's inherently going to turn out good. I think there's a lot of, if you do pattern recognition on how state has handled these things in the past, I think there's reason to be very skeptical of that. But that's something to bring into dialogue around with the AI for sure, around the UBI. But I think, to me, another like point you're speaking into that I think is very, very important, that is a takeaway, at least for me in this conversation. There's no better time to go all in on doing what you love for a living than right now. Like, it right now is the crux that we're at, where for most people, it does not make sense financially. Like, there's an enormous risk that's involved. I really believe that right now is the equivalent of like investing in Bitcoin in 2008, or like being early to the dot-com bubble, so to speak. Is the equivalent right now is going all in on whatever your particular calling mission is. Going all in on that right now is like the ultimate investment of your time and energy. And I think AI is helping create the conditions for those who are ready to make that next leap in terms of their spiritual growth. So that's something on a personal level that I think I'm taking away from what you've been sneaking into as well.
That original point that I made at the start of the video, it does come down to a level of revolution/evolution, love-evolution, that's supposed to happen, where there's a lot of wealth on this planet. There's so many resources. What happens when I don't need to send people out to their doom, extracting a certain resource or handling a certain resource? Now we can start to extract resources in a healthier, safer way. Granted, we don't overdo it. And then where's that resource going to go? We see, like, again, there's just so much happening where, these forever wars are happening. These things are happening to continue to consolidate wealth and consolidate political power, legal power, military power. And that's a huge part of this problem, because it's like the AI, it's one entity in this scenario. Then you can look at just the public as another entity, like the common person, and then it's the ruling class. And how do we effectively go about not centralizing the wealth even more and centralizing the power? It's a big conversation,
Yeah, I think it also comes down to the whole notion of sovereignty, becoming independent and self-sufficient on all levels, first as individuals, but then now moving into communities. I think that we can play the whole, it's important to study the chess pieces on the collective level and how they're moving. Like, that's undoubtedly important. We don't want to just put our head in the sand to what's happening, but also we don't want to just allow all of those situations to siphon our energy and disempower us. We're speaking into that with the whole value of conspiracy mind in this podcast we did before. I think another challenge, I kind of presented the challenge of going all in on the meaningful mission, but also doing so in the context within developing self-sufficient communities. I think that we can use AI to empower, accelerate us becoming more and more self-sufficient in these communities. When we see these trends towards the whole digital IDs and all these kinds of things, we have to ask ourselves, how can we use AI within to empower us, not just as individuals, but as communities? How can we leverage, for instance, I'm really excited about bioconstruction and creating whole new waves in solving the housing crisis. Think about how much people are slaves just for their mortgage, for like basic living.
By design, yeah.
That's part of the system. The central bankers, they want you to destroy intergenerational living and have people think that they need to move out by 18 and go move and start paying ridiculous rent and all of this. There's ways in which we're not recycling our wealth in terms of like a group economic mindset. And I think that we can start to leverage AI to think about ways we can be more efficient in our energetic management on a material level, because the spiritual warfare also manifests in the material. We shouldn't just look at it through materialistic lens. We should also look at it on high. But that's a question, a challenge to those of us in the conscious community. How can we leverage AI to improve our energetic management when that comes with money, that comes with the land, how we're working with the land and building different communities? And then there's an element where AI can't help with us, and that's the human factor, the psychological aspect and the relational organizational dynamics. We need greater mastery in those realms and in those areas. And those are the kinds of areas that AI cannot provide the answer for. So those are definitely some answers that are starting, or like threads to answers to this question.
Yeah. There's this phrase, the illiterate of the 21st century is not those who can't read or write. It's those who can't learn, unlearn, and relearn.
Mm-hmm.
And so now there's less of an excuse not to know. There's less of an excuse, AI is this very strong research tool where you say, this is my particular problem I'm facing. Don't just yap, sweet nothings, pull some papers. You can use it to a degree to boost your intelligence, but then, of course, information war is always something that's happening where, we gotta develop discernment. But yeah, like leveraging AI comes down to, like, at the start I was saying, well, what happens if you use it to be your intelligence and it goes away? But at the same time, what happens when you have this unparalleled tool in your pocket that any problem that comes your way, you can at least get a big head start on and address it, face it, and at least cut out the unknown. A lot of resistance to facing problems is the resistance to assessing the problem, researching, strategizing. Well, now that part is deeply cut away. So these problems, we can at least get that head start and really try to see what's good, and then hopefully we act right.